None of that means that being a parent is easy. It's actually quite difficult. Ask anyone who is one. It's actually very hard to be a good parent. But that doesn't mean we don't know what a great parent is. We actually can define that in relation to fundamental realities we all understand and recognize pretty easily. And something similar to that is true at the university. That what a university is not a mystery.
Join the best in the movement. It's conservative conversations with ISI, educating for liberty since 1953.
Hello, Dr. Stephen Blackwood. Thanks for joining me.
Great to be here. Thank you.
I've heard, and we were talking about this a little bit before we started, I've heard a lot about you in our circles at ISI. Oh, you have to talk to Stephen Blackwood. He's a really interesting person, someone worth getting to know. You get him involved in the programs. Have you heard what he's doing? So I know you're running the president of Ralston College. I think we're going to talk a lot about that, but I want to start with, you are the president of this new, in the sense of it's a new-ish institution doing old things. But how did you get to where you are? What are the sort of, if you follow this, the cannonball moments, the St. Ignatius, life steering moments that brought you to the interests, the passions, and the work that you're doing now?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Tom. I'm a huge admirer of what you and your colleagues do at ISI, and I've known about it and known some of your preceding colleagues for quite a few years now. So it's an honor to be here, and I'm really grateful to be sort of laboring in the vineyard in some sense with all of you, as to use a scriptural metaphor. I would maybe just point to a few things that were big moments in my life. I can't get very far without talking about my parents and my brothers and sisters. I got two wonderful parents that just actually celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. They were hugely influential, as parents usually are, for better or for worse. And for me, for better, I hope. And I've got 9 younger siblings, two sisters and 7 brothers. And so I come from a big family. Oldest of 10 children. Yes. Grew up in rural Canada, actually. I was born in the West, in the Wild West, in sort of frontier country in Alberta, and then grew up in the East in Prince Edward Island on a kind of a small sort of hobby farm. We had a milk cow and a bunch of chickens and turkeys and goats at one point, and big gardens. And anyway, big serious 4 seasons. Wood burning stove that we lit every day for more months in the year than perhaps one might in most of America. In any event, I say all that because those years were profoundly formative for me. The love and support and dynamism and intensity and complexity of human beings that you're living with, that's very formative. The beauty of this, simple and pastoral, but very beautiful, at times stark, at times overwhelming with bloom and blossom landscape, and then it's important to say that my parents were they introduced us both to, I would say, the truth of the Christian religion in a way that we could talk about it and think about it. What did that mean? What was this about? That was a big part. We were raised to think that we had a direct relation to the infinite, to God, and had a responsibility to that, but also that infinite principle cared for us and for others. That was very influential for me. And then finally, I would say my parents introduced us to music, and I grew up playing music, and that was perhaps the earliest, that and a sort of substantial images of the religious and Christian life combined with music. Those were the two sort of formative windows I had into the inheritance of, let's call it, Western civilization and all it stands for. And then I went to college and studied classics, sort of had the great, just, so many of the good things in life, maybe all of them. Like, you don't invent them. This is just not the way the spiritual intellectual economy. It's not how any economy fundamentally works, in a sense. You're fundamentally in a relation of receptivity or gratitude. Now, all of our willed life comes out of, you might say, the superabundance of what is there in the world. So I'm not saying that I'm not a fatalist. I'm not saying that we are not fundamentally determining in certain respects our future. But when you think about the great things in your life, like, I don't know, your parents or music or, your loved ones or even your own talents, it's like you didn't create those. You were the recipient of those, and it's your job to steward them. And so I say all of that because my teachers, again, like my parents, just kind of fell into this amazing a community with astonishingly gifted, inspiring, really serious thinking people. And they were teaching really in the classics department, which means they were teaching, the ancient Greeks, Homer and Plato and Aristotle and the tragedians. And then as that tradition moves forward in time through Neoplatonism, in both the Greek and Latin side, people like Iamblichus and Augustine and Boethius, and then all the way into the Middle Ages, Dante and other figures like that. So my formative education was really, what I'll say, maybe finally, is I realized that the big questions that were moving me also had a relation to where I had come from. And so I came to realize that nothing was more important for me to think about than the nature of the human being, or nature of human subjectivity. What is a human person? And what are the stakes, and what is human nature? How do human beings come to be realize what potential they have? And so, to put it in the ancient language, I was really interested in the topic of the soul. What a human person is, and how it comes to realize the highest end or purpose that it can. And that, of course, had something to do with the fact that I'd grown up in this really dynamic and beautiful, and sometimes troubled and complicated and tension-filled home, where these people, these are my brothers and sisters, my parents are calling them these people. But the reason I'm saying that is these persons I'd had an up-close, as many of us do, an up-close encounter with the wonder and complexity and depth and beauty and truth of what a human creature is. And I wanted to understand that. And that's been the big question of my life. And that actually takes us to Ralston College, because one can approach this project in a lot of different ways. But at the end of the day, there's no more important way into it than what it endeavors to do for the young people it is privileged to have as its students. But maybe I'll stop there, and you can take this next step of the conversation whatever way you like.
Yeah, I was curious. You said you played music, and that had a big impact on your understanding of what Western civilization is. What did you play, and what do you think music does to enmesh us or introduce us to the totality of the West?
Wow. Well, my colleague who set up this conversation was not kidding when she said I should be ready for some big questions. That's a great and fundamental question that human beings have been asking and attempting to answer, and more importantly, living in relation to the truth of that question. You can think about, you can enjoy and appreciate music without thinking a lot about it, because it's a fundamental reality. And so, I played the flute, actually. My parents, when they were still in student housing, I was born when my father was in medical school, and my mother actually dropped out of college, stopped studying, though she was a very gifted student when I was born. And they were great lovers of music. And I remember one night on the record player was one of our, couple dozen records. And it was James Galloway, the great Irish flute player. And somehow it was a very formative memory. And it never occurred to me that, maybe the flute was not the most masculine of instruments or anything like that. I wanted to play the flute from the time I was like 9 or 10 years old. And I did. I played that, learned it to a pretty high level. What does music do? This is such a good question, and we could take our whole time talking about it, and I'm not by any means a philosopher of aesthetics, so I hope your listeners will stay with me as I give my own layman's best attempt at an answer. Obviously, one thing music does is, you can learn about a tradition. I mean, musical traditions they come at different times and places. And that is that's not non-trivial. That's significant. But that I think is not the most important thing that music does. I think what music does is well, it mediates our subjectivity. It gives us an understanding of ourselves in relation to high order principles and realities. And so, tones and harmonies, chords, and scales, and all that. They're not simply constructs. They're ways into what you might call, the music of the spheres, or the deep nature or relation between what's fundamental in reality itself. And I think there's a deep reason. Just to give an example, the music of Bach, famously, people talk about Bach. Of course, it's not just the genius and the complexity. It's that somehow in Bach you perceive a kind of order in things, a deep rootedness to an order that embraces and even affirms complexity. So you kind of can think about music both, of course, obviously, both melodically and harmonically. And I've said something about the harmony, the relation between, ratios and structures, balances between notes. There's a lot in there to think about. Like we use music as a harmony, harmony and musical metaphors all the time. What does it mean to be in harmony with others? Harmony with yourself, harmony with your action, harmony with your purposes and action and all of that kind of stuff. But there's something very deep in thinking about ourselves as a line of music in relation to other lines of music. And that, one thing I thought a lot about, which I don't have a good answer to, is like, what does it mean? When you're learning to play, you will, say you're playing some beautiful piece. Well, what does it mean to? So, in principle, you might say, in the abstract, that's a beautiful piece of music. But what does it mean to play it beautifully? Because we all know it can be played, better or less well. And so, what does it mean to play the music beautifully? And what does it mean to shape the line and the both the dynamic and the pacing and the tempo and all of that? That's a really deep question. And you might say it's a way into, maybe the most important question, which is, what does it mean for you, for me, to live the lives, live the lives that we're given to live, the one of them we're given to live, as well, as beautifully, as truly as we can. And that's where I think, melody intersects with harmony, that a line that has its own integrity and purpose and truth and beauty becomes woven into other lines. And finally, I would say that I think that there's a reason why sad music, the most beautiful music, is almost always sad. It's not a happy march or a bebop or whatever. It's sad, and why is that? And the best answer I can give is that somehow sad music, takes into itself the pain and difficulty and otherness and finitude of reality itself, and somehow redeems it and brings it into itself, so it becomes known and affirmed within a kind of melody, or harmonically indeed too. So if you think about something like Bach's Mass in B minor, or things like this, which have a statement of a theme, and then there's sort of Keith Jarrett's, the first part of Keith Jarrett's Cologne concert, the Cologne concert in Cologne, Germany in 1974 or 5. And I think the best-selling piano album of all time. It's an incredible story, actually, and we could maybe talk about it later. But this has this structure, a statement of a theme, and then all of the otherness and difficulty and pain of the world and experience, and yet somehow that becomes known and knowable, not tamed exactly, but known and brought into and comprehended by the song itself, and brought into a kind of resolution and harmony. What starts in otherness and opposition. So that, to me, is a very deep and beautiful reality that is also at the heart of human life and subjectivity. We're not here on this earth to have a simple life or an easy life. That's not a meaningful life. We're here to rise to the difficult and true and beautiful things that that we're made for, whatever those are. And there is, I think, a way of thinking about that as a song. So that's what I think about music.
Hey there, listener. I wanted to take a quick moment to thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations. This podcast is a production of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, and our mission here at ISI is educating for liberty. If you'd like to join us in fulfilling our mission, consider helping us by rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, to help us reach more listeners like yourself. Now, back to the show. That was a wonderful meditation. I'm sure we could talk this entire episode about music, but what you were saying there at the end, I think, pushes us on to this new project that you're working on as president with Ralston College. What's the story behind, if you studied classics and you were in with very serious people and scholars and thinkers in classics departments, why create a new college? What did you see as what was lacking in higher education, which is something that I'm sure our listeners will be very familiar with, each in their own way, is something's missing. But what did you see that was missing or insufficient about simply becoming a professor of classics or a professor of philosophy or of theology, or of music even, because that was a wonderful meditation on it. Why create a new institution?
Well, just say a couple of things. The first is, I'm glad you brought up sort of the whole question of the classics, because I though I did study the classics, I don't consider myself a classicist. I'm not a master of the ancient languages at anything like the level I wish that I were. I think broadly speaking, the education I had was just in the fundamental questions, the perennial questions, the ones that just keep recurring, that virtually all human beings at all times and places ask in some way or another. How do you make sense of mortality and truth and beauty and justice and suffering and all that kind of stuff? And I really do think that the best way into those questions is by looking at how people started to ask them and the answers that were given early on, which are some very substantial answers that then we built on over time. Let's put it that way. So, and that maybe is a good way into talking about why we started Ralston College, my colleagues and I. And that, what I would say is that, why start a new college? Well, because, there's 3,500 or 4,000 of them, depending on how you count, 2-year, 4-year, accredited, non-accredited. There's thousands of colleges at a minimum in the United States alone. And they're closing at a very fast clip, by the way. Something like one a week I read recently. And so, why start a new one? Particularly when the economics in the marketplace seem to say, well, we need fewer, not more. And I think, the simple answer to the question is that though I'm not a catastrophist, there are great people teaching, and there's some wonderful, places and pockets and so on. Broadly speaking, I think the situation with our colleges and universities is something like if our grocery stores just had mostly kind of tasteless and sometimes really unhealthy and often not enough real food. And you'd say, well, why would you start a new grocery store, a new marketplace of food? You'd say, well, because we think human beings are hungry, and they're hungry for good food, and they need it, actually, and they're not getting it. And so something like that, I think, is the answer, that we're not a reactionary place where we're fundamentally, by the way, I don't think you can build anything out of reaction. You can only build from a positive vision. I often say, Tom, I don't like brutalist architecture. I've said this publicly many times to anyone who will listen. I don't like it. I think it's demeaning and dehumanizing. But anti-brutalism is not a program for building a single darn building, right? You have to have a positive plan for what tradition or harmony of elements or decorative elements or human scale you want to instantiate in a particular building to have a concrete plan. And the same is true with colleges. So you have to have a vision, if a positive vision. And ours is not reactionary. We have a very positive thing of what we're trying to instantiate. And the question is, well, what is that? And I think it's something like what I was saying about the grocery store. We're trying to go really direct to the source and give people the direct relationship to the greatest works of art and intellect, to the inheritance of the human past. You might say all human beings ask these fundamental questions. How to live well, how do we deal with suffering and our own failings and our anxiety or depression, our our inability to do the things that we think that we should do, the difficulties we have in love and family and friendship, our longing for redemption, for aspiration, all of these fundamental questions, right? And I actually don't think there's anything more important, in a sense, to human beings than those questions. In the sense that I don't think there's anything more important to most human beings at the end of their lives than being able to feel somehow, to think positively about themselves, that they lived the one life they had to live as they should have. That, in short, it was meaningful. And what makes life, how do you live a life when you only have one to live it so that you yourself, don't take my word for it, I'm not saying how I think you should live, how you think at the end of your day, you will be able to answer to yourself, let alone to God, about how you have lived. And so what I'm saying is, what we find in our students, because I often ask them this question, for goodness sakes, why the hell, what the heck are you doing here? I mean, here are these hugely talented students who could have had any other number of other opportunities and did have other opportunities, and they came to us, a startup college in its third year. For goodness sakes, why? And I think it has to do with the fact that our students believe that, and you should ask them this question yourself, but I think it's because they believe that we're going to take them seriously. And we're going to do everything we can to help them ask those defining and fundamental perennial questions. And so how do we do that? Well, the humanities, you might say the humanities are just, by which I mean philosophy, literature, music, history, theology, architecture, the arts, all of this, broadly speaking. In fact, the sciences, broadly speaking, could be called, trajectories of human inquiry, that natural science, so to speak, or natural philosophy. And so, to put it simply, all of us are asking these questions, and they're hard. Life is hard. By the way, do I think I have answers to any of these questions? I mean, think about them for 35 or 40 years. They're hard questions. They're like the questions at the heart of human life. Why am I saying that? Because I think that the best we can do is to bring people face to face with the things that human beings from the past have figured out to the best of their ability. So if you were trying to build a building, for example, let's go back to architecture. And I imagine the difference if I said to you, listen, Tom, you're going to have to build a building, but you're not allowed to consult anyone who's ever built a building in the past, or any building that has ever been built. You're just going to have to really fly blind and just figure this out. You'd be like, that's a tall order.
That's very overwhelming just to think about that.
And so, but we often say something like that to our own young people, rather than say, hey, you know what? You can have direct access to the best that human beings have thought and read and written and created in all of history. And in some sense, they did that to give it to you. And that is there for you, as it is for all of us, the rightful inheritance of every man and woman and child who ever lives. And so the point I'm trying to make here is simply that what Ralston College is about going back direct to the source in a community that values absolutely freedom of thought and friendship, in a fellowship that is together committed to making the best sense, if we can, of these perennial and fundamental questions, in and through a relation to the historic record, the development of human life and thought and culture as we have it from ancient times up to the present, and in relation to the fundamental questions that we have ourselves today, and in a community instantiated here and now in the United States of America, in order to surmount the very pressing challenges and enormous opportunities that our own lives and our own time and culture present.
And that, to me, that sounds just like the definition of a university, or at least of a college, is, it's a community first and foremost, enmeshed in its particularity, but seeking questions to the most fundamental answers, which is very hard, as you mentioned. I guess my question is how you do that, because maybe explain your curriculum and your program offerings and how you achieve that. Because it seems, I think, at least from what I know, which is not a ton, but some, is that it's done in a particular and in a very, I think, interesting and intriguing way. So you can speak to that.
Yeah, you betcha. Well, maybe I'll start by saying that there's no point in starting a new college if you're going to do things just the same way as everyone else is, because what we're not facing is a shortage of colleges that look like the current ones. Those ones are closing. So if you're not going to do it differently, and then there's no point in doing it. Then the question is, well, what does that mean? Because just different in itself is not a virtue, right? So it looks something like, I'd say, building from first principles. It's a famous way of approaching new ventures. I know Elon Musk writes and speaks about this, and though of course he didn't invent the idea of building from first principles, he's just extremely good at it himself in a range of domains, astonishingly so. And so what does it look like in terms of doing that at a college? And let me approach this in two ways. The first is, I want to give you another metaphor. My wife and I have sadly not been blessed with children, but I know a bit about family life. And if you were to imagine that you took 8 or 10 of the best parents that you know, and you were to put them in a room and say, all right, we want you to tell us what the key attributes or aspects or principles are of raising a child as well as you possibly can. Well, I suspect that if you gave them an hour, whatever, gun to the head, so to speak, within an hour, they would settle in some kind of consensus on what the really fundamentals are. Maybe unconditional love, discipline, some kind of education, maybe exposure to to the moral life or transcendent life, responsibility. Anyway, you can imagine that you could actually fairly quickly settle on, pretty robustly, yes, this is true, what these people are saying, and it's pretty complete, and they're agreeing on this. And the thing is, if you ran that experiment another 1,000 times with different people every time, it would continue to evolve, but you would probably find that actually, the people at the beginning, they really knew what this was. Why do I say this? Because none of that means that being a parent is easy. It's actually quite difficult. Ask anyone who is one. It's actually very hard to be a good parent. But that doesn't mean we don't know what a great parent is. We actually can define that in relation to fundamental realities we all understand and recognize pretty easily. And something similar to that is true at the university. That what a university is not a mystery. What a great university looks like, what its attributes are, these are not a mystery. So what is it? It's something like, absolutely wonderful scholars and intellect, bright minds who really know and love what they're doing, who want to share it with the next generation, young people who want precisely to do that, and then you need a place that is designed in order to make all of that happen as well as possible. And of course, there are certain historical and traditional norms that have evolved in order to facilitate that, as well as possible. But right now, it's as if, at college, we've just got it backwards. It's like if you were to ask the parents and they were to come back with an answer like, okay, we think we've got it. It's having a 72-inch flat screen TV in every room of the house on all the time. And you say, well, what? No, it isn't. It just isn't. But that's the sort of thing we're hearing about education. Like, it's about activism, or it's about preparing you, simply speaking, for a job. I'm not saying that doesn't matter. There's not actually fundamentally what the university is for. Or it's about some form of indoctrination, or all of this stuff, or climbing walls, or a big meal plan, or all the things you can see that colleges use to market their wares, so to speak, to students. I think in the end that's a mistake, and that what a college really is around these fundamentals I have described. And so as the second thing I want to say is that as we then thought about what it meant to build a new university according to first principles, we found that our thinking led in some pretty radical directions. And I say radical in the true sense of the word. It comes from the Latin meaning the word for root, right? And so when you go radical, what radical really means is to go back to the roots of things. And I think that is what our thinking led us to. For example, we have a very remarkable man in we have a whole team of extremely impressive people, obviously, but one person in particular is named Joseph Conlon. He's a great philologist. He's got a dozen or 24, something like that, languages. He's fluent in many languages. But what's really amazing about him is the way he lights students on fire. Plutarch has this beautiful phrase, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, like crammed full of stuff, but a fire to be lit. And so you might say, one of the fundamentals of an education is you got to light the fire. Like, that's what it's really about, right? I mean, what, you want to get to the end and be like, oh gosh, I'm glad that's over. I mean, that's a failure of an education. You should get to the end and be like, wow, I am burning so hot. I can't wait to keep learning about these things, or about life, or about myself, or about others, and the wonder of the world. And so the reason I mentioned Dr. Conlon is because we had the intuition that though it sounded crazy, that maybe we should try and teach people some Greek, ancient modern Greek, and that we had the idea that maybe we could do that in Greece. And we were working at the level of intuition about fundamental principles. Greek is, of course, you might call it even the matrix of humanistic inquiry. It's the fundamental vocabulary of, all of you think about, chemistry, physics, poetry, philosophy, architecture. All of these are Greek words, right? So it's the matrix of humanistic inquiry in the West. It's the origin of many of our ideas and ideals. But, you could say, well, you can, try and teach people that here at home. And that is true to an extent, although if you look at Greek teaching in most universities, most people don't learn it very well. And most people, including myself, regard their study of that language as a failure because they never really learned it. And so we thought, well, what does it mean to try and give people access to this incredible treasure trove in a way that they'll really have it? And so we take people for the program, to answer your question simply, is this. It's a one-year kind of master's. It's a graduate program, a one-year master's in the humanities. It's an integrated humanistic curriculum, and it goes through 4 2-month terms or quarters. The first 2 months starts in Greece learning Greek, and it is an absolute intense. It's like Navy SEAL boot camp meets the Grand Tour. And so you're on the island of Samos, where Pythagoras and Epicurus were from. It's unbelievably beautiful. You're right there in the Aegean, and you are also working harder at the hardest thing than you have ever done in your life. And you are in a spirited cohort. You're going to see Pythagoras' cave, and you're reading the book of Revelation composed by St. John in the shadow of the monastery in Patmos. You're having these sort of wonderful experience of in situ learning while you are throwing yourself with everything you've got into this language. But because we teach it as a spoken language, by the end of this 8 weeks, the students actually have a very considerable developing grasp on the language. Then they come to Savannah. And here in Savannah, Georgia, one of the most beautiful cities in the country, they proceed through the next 3 2-month quarters. And those, broadly speaking, follow the development of the ancient, medieval, and modern worlds of Western civilization, broadly construed through the philosophy and poetry, and to some degree the music and art of those periods, along a theme. And our themes in the first year was the self, in the second year, the whole or God, and this year is nature. And you need a theme because you need some kind of through line trajectory. In a sense, it's the same content, but united by a different governing question in each given year. While they also maintain, with about 40% of their time, a very intensive continued study of the Greek language. And at the end of that year, they have summative double-blind mark examinations in both of these 2 streams, on the one hand in Greek, and on the other hand in philosophy and literature. And all of this is facilitated by a very lively and tight community, as I say, that values freedom of thought and friendship. We have weekly, now a very treasured ritual, a weekly college dinner where all of our students and faculty and some of our staff gather for a sort of spirited conversation. It's kind of formal on the one hand and very spirited and lively on the other, with poetry, recitations, and all of this kind of stuff. But I say all of that because I'm trying to give you a sense of the context of what building from first principles for us looks like. On the one hand, it's very unlike what other colleges and universities are doing. I think our Greek program is the most exciting, those 2 months in Greece is the most exciting contradistinctive program in existence at any university today. I really believe that. And that contradistinctive building from first principles stretches to our teaching of philosophy and literature and the way we design the community and the rhythms of life. On the one hand, on the other hand, let's face it, we're just trying to rediscover these treasures of the past to the best of our ability. And the last thing I would want us to be would be completely original, because that would have the hubris of thinking that in 2,500 or 3,000 years, human beings have not learned to do this well. We're just trying to imitate or emulate the greatest of our forebears in a fresh and exciting way here and now.
I mean, it sounds just absolutely incredible, especially going to Greece to study Greek, especially when you connect you're connecting the language to the people as they historically spoke it through a sort of a remnant of the landmarks that they've left behind. I studied some classics as part of my history program, so especially the Greeks, not so much the Romans. But study the 5th century Athenian democracy. I've never been to Greece. I just can't wait to go see the Parthenon and go to all the different sites where the Peloponnesian War was fought, and bring my Thucydides. And I don't read Greek either, so I didn't do Greek language, but Greek history, Greek philosophy. So I guess actually through this sort of golden thread, or the connection of place to language or place and ideas, I'm curious why Savannah, Georgia, as the home of Ralston College, because America too, right, has all of this diverse and varied beauty and majesty to it in its own right, in addition to the Mediterranean. So why Savannah?
Yeah, great question. Maybe I'll just say as a very quick close, as it were, the thread of the last question. We've also test piloted a Latin program this summer, but Greek and Latin, you start talking about, oh, this is just kind of an obscure classics place or whatever. There's a real problem in our time thinking that way, because really all Greek and Latin are the languages that give you access to most of the record of what's most important in our own Western civilization. So you might say, I don't want to call them just tools, but fundamentally that's what they are. And until yesterday, those tools were fairly widely distributed. And they certainly were the possession of those who were in some kind of position of cultural responsibility. But anyone can learn Greek and Latin. Anyone who can learn any other language can learn those languages, but they're fundamental for that reason. So it's a real problem. It's like if we were to start thinking that teaching people how to build structures that will hold up was somehow a luxury in architecture. Like, it's really fundamental. And I want to make that point as clear as I can. There is no Western civilization without direct access to the civilization itself. And then the question you ask about Savannah, it's a wonderful one. As people know to pick up, I'm not from Savannah myself. And so we chose Savannah as the location for this new university. And the question is why? Well, the first reason is because Savannah is one of the most beautiful cities in the country. And I don't say that lightly. I sometimes say that when I say Savannah is the most beautiful city in the country, that's an opinion, not a fact. But when I say it's in the top 5, that's a fact, not an opinion. And it's kind of a humorous way of getting to the fact, I think, that Savannah is objectively, I think it's the largest historic downtown core in the country. It is an astonishingly beautiful place, 1733 layout, built around a Oglethorpe layout according to a square logic, and it is really an astonishingly beautiful place. I've had the pleasure and privilege to have lived in several of the most beautiful cities in the world when I was in graduate school and other walks or periods of life, and I really do think that Savannah is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And so, well, why does that matter? Well, because we thought that the natural and architectural beauty of the city would be an elevating, inspiring reality for our students. And because its history is important too, because there's a sense, how does the new college, literally our first class, graduated in 2023, how does a new college claim to have any history? Now, principally, that's by making alive this inheritance of the past, that you can go back and speak to Plato or Aristotle, commune in some real sense with people from past eras. But also, there's a way in which, the great universities, their guardianship of that sacred flame is symbolized or manifest by the history of the buildings themselves. And we, of course, don't have that. We're a new college. And so the fact that we've been able to acquire or rent or become the stewards of some beautiful buildings in one of the most wonderful historic cities in the country allows that presence of the past to be with us day by day. Second, I would say that there was no competition in the city of Savannah. There were no private liberal arts colleges or universities of any traditional kind within the historic downtown core of Savannah. Third, however, the Savannah College of Art and Design, which is just a juggernaut of an art history and technical art college, which was founded in the late 70s, is now one of the largest art colleges in the world. They have graphic design and fashion and all kinds of interesting and exciting fields. They have, I think, 17,000 students here in Savannah. The reason that's important is because it really showed us that Savannah was a place that was attractive from the point of view of students, faculty, and staff as a place to live. And however good you think your program is going to be, if you don't have that, good luck pulling it off. You really do have to be in a place people want to live. And then finally, I think it's the case that that Georgia and this part of the United States has generally been a place that has been friendly to what we're doing, and that it's a place that is open to some sense that there is that we have inherited something, however broken and imperfect it has been realized. We have inherited things that is our responsibility to be the custodians of and to hand on as good of repair as we possibly can. So that was why Savannah and our own students have the pleasure and the privilege of encountering this area. We take them on field trips around things of a historic or natural or architectural interest throughout the city and beyond. And I think it is, I would say just very quickly, that it has proven, I think it's true to say, to our students to be a really inspiring place. They love it here. And I think that's one thing that we as adult citizens of this country need to take very seriously, that there's been an enormous degradation of the physical and built landscape in our country. If you can go to literally any small town of the 18th and mostly 19th and early 20th century in the United States, every town without exception that I have gone to, the people that built it in that time did their best to build as beautifully and as wonderfully as they could, whether it was the town hall or the post office or whatever. And we simply are not doing that today. We have not only been asleep at the switch, we have enabled forms of inhuman development to mar that. And again, I'm not an anti-building. I'm a very pro-building, very pro-free market building kind of person. But we have clearly what we have built in the last 50, 60, 70 years, broadly speaking, and I know there are always exceptions, broadly speaking, has been a travesty and a desecration of how human beings through all times and places, transhistorically and transgeographically, have built the things that they have lived in and in relation to.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed kind of building off of that is as I'm driving around or flying and going to different places for ISI events or just, my personal travels throughout the country, is a lot of, especially small towns, they were built up and then they've been sort of left behind. And it's more than just, we have to think more about in terms of, and then just leaving behind, but the stewardship of a place over time has been disregarded. So even if you take a big city or a big place, a place of importance, are new, beautiful buildings, things that are ennobling and remind us of, things divine, the highest things, are they being built today? We must say no, but also in the smaller places, the ordinary and the common, that those people built with great verve and particularity in their rights. I had a professor who said, I used to go to a Polish church, but we had the Italians, and we didn't really like each other. It's the same religion, but it's our sort of vulgarity. This is the thing that makes us who we are. That has been neglected, at least in my experience driving around as well. I'm being from New England myself. A lot of you think about the universities, Harvard, Yale, Princeton is not in New England, but those are the Ivies. But then you have all sorts of other colleges and historic places that have done the liberal arts tradition, but they've thrown it away through this sort of hubris that things have to be relevant today or about activism, like you were mentioning earlier. But at the same time, you were mentioning, and I want to pick up on this, is that we are trying to recover or reestablish something in our particular moment by seeing that there's something missing in America, in Western civilization today. So there is a sense in which there is some sort of relevance to the Greek and Latin past and the questions of Plato and Aristotle, but it isn't necessarily obvious. So maybe you can tie that picture for us. What is the linkage between taking a year off to study Greek language and history and philosophy and literature that speaks to the needs of America today?
Yeah, you betcha. And I'm very grateful for that question, Tom. Let me put it this way. If you look out, broadly speaking, in the United States and throughout the West, and not even just the West, the world around, there's all kinds of things, we should not lose sight of that we should be very grateful for. All kinds of wonderful technologies and, all sorts of things that we, longer lifespans than, although they're shorter now than they were by some evidence. But in any case, they're, broadly speaking, we're the richest and the best well-fed and so on people in human history. We should not lose sight of that. That's an enormous achievement of our forebears. That said, I think it's hard to look around and think that things have been going well the last 50 years or more, maybe 70, 150 years. You can look at our architecture we were just talking about. You can look at our art and culture. You can look at our civic life and the lack of confidence in our institutions. You can look at the hyper-partisan and fractured, alienated sort of civic life or dialogue we have with others. You can look at journalism. You can look at the state of science. You can look at any number of metrics across the whole range, whether it's healthcare to the state of scientific discovery, to the state of our polity, to the state of our communities, to the state of anxiety rising and depression amongst the young, the exploitation of the dopaminergic cycles of our attention and so on. What I'm trying to say here is that we've got some pretty big problems at this juncture in Western civilization. This is not, one of those moments that, if we just do what we did last year, we're going to be fine. We're talking about a moment in which the candles are going out. We do not have a means of transmission of our civilization. You might say, well, why does that matter? And I would actually say, if I didn't think that civilization were actually positively an inheritance that enables human beings to thrive, I would say, well, who does care? Maybe we've got something new and better right now, because that's all we should really care about is what is going to enable human beings to maximally realize their potential and to live their lives to flourish in the way that each of them are uniquely made to do. And so, what I want to say fundamentally is that the kind of education we're offering is meant to enable young people today who are called to do this, to do the heavy lifting of the work we most need to do, in order to enable the forms of life and culture that enable human beings to flourish and thrive. And I think we have hundreds of millions of people who are living less than they could or should. We have a kind of massive waste of human capital across the board. And that is directly at the foot of our culture. Because all a culture is, you might say, is the soil we're growing in. And if the soil does not have the right ingredients, if it's too alkaline or too acidic or too whatever, you can have soil that's bad for human beings to grow in. And fundamentally, I think we have a lot of very tectonic, fundamental work to do in order to enable human beings to live the lives that they are meant to live. And that's what fundamentally Ralston College is meant to be about. It's meant to be about enabling the high-order interventions that are required to rediscover those paradigms of human flourishing, from architecture all the way through to the sciences, from culture through to political life, to family life. We have to rediscover the paradigms of what make for successful, prosperous, happy, and above all, meaningful human lives in order to put the pieces of our culture back together. And that fundamentally is what Ralston College is about, because you can talk as long as you like about civilizational matters and the long scope of human history, but the only needle that is ever worth moving is the one within the heart and mind of a particular individual. And so what we're about is enabling our students to understand in the deepest and most powerful ways possible these perennial truths, to be able to confront difficult and complex questions across domains so they can have an impact and make an intervention in a range of fields, but at a very high ceiling way in whatever fields they go on to encounter. And I'll just say in closing that our admissions are open now for the 2025-26 Masters in Humanities, this program that starts in Greece and then continues here in Savannah. And I should note that through the generosity of our philanthropists, we are able to admit people on a need-blind basis. So up until now, no student has ever been turned away from Ralston College on the basis of cost. Our students have been on full scholarship and enabled by the generosity of this program to undertake it without regard to their own financial needs. So, or means, I should say. So I would like to encourage all those who feel, you might say, called or inspired or curious to come to our website at Ralston College. It's www.ralston.ac and to come and learn about the program if it feels that it might be right for you. It's the challenge and the adventure of a lifetime.
Well, Stephen, you perfectly anticipated my last question because we are out of time. But based on what I'm hearing and hearing about you and about Ralston College, I highly encourage it, especially for our students who might be wondering what they're going to do after their 4-year college or their 2-year college. And, they're not entirely sure what to do next. I think Ralston College would be a good place to spend some time with you and Stephen, with the faculty and the team you've built there. So thank you for joining me and telling us all about it. Love to have you back on in the future. But in addition to going to Ralston, if people want to follow more of your work in particular, what would you recommend to them?
I would say simply that I've got the privilege of being the host of the Ralston College podcast. I am on X, and though not by any means a social media master, I am there, and I like to engage in conversation. And just as many of us do, I have written a book on Boethius that may be of interest to people who are interested in some of these perennial questions. That's easily found on my website or on Amazon or wherever. But I just want to end with one last note to speak a word of encouragement to all your listeners, to your colleagues at ISI. We're living at an unbelievably important and tumultuous, but also a high opportunity time in history. And I just want to, there's the old Chinese proverb, I think it is, that the best time to plant a tree is 50 or 100 or however many years ago, or right now. And I want to thank and encourage all of your listeners and all those out there, in all the ways and places and parts of their life that they're working. You know what? This is a wonderful time, and I want to thank all of them and encourage them to reach for what's highest and best, and to trust their instincts about the ways they can live the lives in the highest and best way that they're made to live, and to thank them for their work, as I say, as a co-laborer in this vineyard we have the privilege of being in for this little mortal life we have.
A perfect note on which to end, and I agree very strongly. Stephen Blackwood, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations with ISI. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out our website at isi.org/resources to see all that we offer our members, including the Intercollegiate Review, select modern age articles, debates, lectures, and of course, this podcast. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to rate and review, and we will see you next time on Conservative Conversations with ISI.